Learn how to use NestJS to build scalable backend applications. In this course, you'll explore controllers, services, modules, decorators, pipes, guards, and exception handling, all while building the profile feature for DevMatch, a dating app for developers. You'll learn all about Next.js's modular architecture, TypeScript support, and built-in tools to create clean, testable code. Don, the developer from Scrimba, developed this course.
Welcome to Scrimba's Intro to NestJS course. If you're looking to level up your backend skills, move beyond just building basic Express apps, and challenge yourself with a more robust and scalable framework, then this course is for you. Let me go ahead and give you a quick overview of what Nest is about and some of the reasons you might want to consider building with it. Nest uses classes, decorators, and TypeScript to help create clean, testable code and provides first-class dependency injection out of the box through its dependency injection system. One thing to note though is you can actually make Nest work with JavaScript too if you're not too familiar with TypeScript just yet. Nest has similar module and dependency injection patterns to Angular and Java Spring Boot, so if you're familiar with that, you'll feel right at home with working with Nest. If you aren't familiar with either, don't worry. This course is meant to be beginner friendly and you will become more comfortable with it anyways. If you've built APIs with Express, that's great. Nest actually uses Express under the hood, so it's compatible with a lot of Express middleware. Or if you prefer Fastify, that's an option in Nest as well. One thing that people love about Nest is its opinionated architecture. It organizes features into modules and uses the dependency injection system to solve common dependency management problems you get with Node apps just using Express. It does a great job at keeping things modular. And Nest is great at building both monoliths and microservices. In terms of market demand, although it's scalable for large applications, and that is a strength of it, it's actually mainly used in small to medium-sized companies. So a lot of people think that it's meant for just enterprise apps, and that's not the case. The usage of it is just increasing over time, and it's actually become one of the most popular frameworks in the Node ecosystem. Here are a few companies that have built apps with Nest. This obviously isn't a full list, but I want to level with you. I know a lot of you are probably taking this course to level up as a backend dev in the Node ecosystem and just increase your marketability. We need to have an honest conversation. Most aspiring developers are just building basic Express apps. A lot of people are just going through the same MERN stack tutorial, and then you're also competing with other people that are going through the same MERN stack tutorials. A lot of backend positions in web development, especially with the larger applications, use heavier frameworks. Nest has a lot of depth to it. Being able to demonstrate that you're familiar with and can build things with a more scalable framework like Nest looks way better than piecing together a simple Express app. If you want to stand out more, you need to do more. Building things with Nest will force you to set a higher bar for yourself and give you confidence in building more professional applications. Now, the Nest CLI, which we'll use later, is really convenient and speeds up the scaffolding when creating new features, and you can trust that it starts you off with the best Nest conventions. Honestly, after I switched over to Nest, I gained a renewed excitement in working in the Node ecosystem, and I'm really excited to teach you how to build things with it. So let's get started. In this course, we're building DevMatch, a simple dating app for developers. Now, this is meant to be beginner friendly, so we'll just be focused on building out the profile feature for a dating app, but this feature alone will allow us to get you much more comfortable with the fundamentals and be able to start building something of your own with Nest. To start working with Nest, you should at least be familiar with JavaScript, preferably TypeScript. If you're not really familiar with TypeScript, that's okay. We won't be diving that deep into TypeScript, and you'll still be able to learn how to use Nest. You should also be familiar with Node. Believe it or not, discovering how abstractions work underneath instead of jumping into just relying on it is a fantastic way to learn them. And before you jump into building something with Nest, you should have familiarity with building personal projects with Express. Think of this as the next step after you build a few basic Express apps and you're familiar with routing. While Scrimba has a ton of JavaScript courses to get you more familiar with it, I included specific links to the others to get you up to speed if you haven't explored the murky waters of the backend yet. For the TypeScript course, going through TypeScript fundamentals and practicing what you learned there should be sufficient. At the time of this recording, you'll need at least version 20 of Node to run Nest. All right, now that we got all of that out of the way, let's finally get started. I'll see you in the next lesson. Let's go ahead and set up the initial scaffolding. Especially if this is your first time with Nest, I highly recommend you use Nest CLI for this. Let's install the CLI and packages we'll need to get up and running. Also, I just want to give you a heads up. If you're running this locally, I highly recommend you follow the steps in Nest documentation. When it comes to the CLI, we're going to tweak our commands so that it plays nicely within Scrimba's environment, but you can actually just use the commands we use in this course when working on your project locally if you want. I just want to give you a heads up as it'll be slightly different than what you may see in the documentation. Let's go ahead and set up the CLI. So what this command is going to do is it's going to temporarily install the CLI. We're going to create a new project called DevMatch. We're going to set the package manager as npm. We're going to skip the git setup and install everything in the current directory. Let me go ahead and speed through this for us. All right, Nest is almost set up. We just need to install our packages. Perfect. Let's try booting up our project. If you're setting this up locally, normally you'd be able to just go to localhost 3000 in the browser and see hello world. With the way Scrimba currently records the browser output, we would need to tweak this slightly to get it so that the output is properly captured and shown to you. Rather than doing that, since this is a backend course after all, I'd rather use Scrimba's network tool to be able to simulate a GET request. If you've ever used Postman, it's similar to that. If you haven't, I highly recommend you try Postman out for yourself. It's been an invaluable tool I've used as I built out APIs. Let's try it out. Success. As you can see, we're getting a status code of 200. Let's check the response, and we see hello world. We've officially spun up our first Nest app. It's that easy to get up and running locally to start building out features. Now it's time to start getting you more comfortable with how Nest works. I'll see you in the next lesson. Let's go ahead and create our first module. Modules are great for organizing components. They help organize code that's relevant to a specific feature, helping to maintain clear boundaries and better organization. You could use the CLI to generate all of the boilerplate for a feature like so. But as we're learning, let's use the CLI more selectively to generate what we need as we go through the lessons. Let's generate our first module. So what the CLI just did is it created our profiles feature in the src folder. As we can see, we have a new profiles folder. If we check it out, we have our module file. And then the CLI conveniently also added the profiles module to the imports as well. Let's go ahead and check out our profiles module file. As you can see, it's pretty empty. We haven't really added anything yet. Let's start populating our feature. The next step is to create our controller file. Our controller will contain all of our routes for the profile feature. We can actually go ahead and use the CLI to create our controller file as well. CLI is really convenient. So as you can see, it auto-populated the profiles module. We can now see that our controller is being imported properly. Let's go ahead and open up our controller file. Now, our controller is empty by default, and what we're going to do is we're going to start populating this manually, and we'll get you some practice with this. One thing you'll notice is that it also auto-generated a spec file where we're going to put our test for our controller in. Now, we're not going to be writing tests in this course, but I just wanted to make you aware that this is also generated. But there's an interesting little symbol here. This is called a decorator. They're basically higher order functions. If you've never heard of a higher order function before, let's say you have a function, say hello. A decorator function will take the say hello function and do some extra stuff like printing a line before and after the main function runs. It just adds additional behavior to the function. Decorators aren't currently implemented in JavaScript, but they've been in TypeScript for a while and are enabled by setting the experimental decorators compile option in your tsconfig file, and have evolved over time. Nest sets this up automatically, so you don't need to worry about this though. The main thing you need to know is that this is what using a decorator looks like, and Nest has a ton of built-in decorators that make your life easier. We'll be using some of them in this course, and you'll start to get the hang of using them by the end of it. So if they look intimidating, don't worry about it. You will get more comfortable with them. In the next lesson, we're going to finally set up our routes. I'll see you there. Finally, it's time to start building out our routes. Now you'll notice that I copied and pasted this in. These are the routes that we're going to be building out in this course. Let's start with setting up the route to return all dating profiles. So let's go ahead and import our get decorator. And with our get decorator, we're going to call that on a function we're just going to call find all. And we're going to go ahead and return an empty array. So we're just returning an empty array to just test if this is working. Now, before we do that, let me go ahead and open this up. So you'll see in the runner that everything looks good. What I want to do is break this to just show you what happens when we break it. So let's go ahead and save it here. You'll notice that we do get an error in the runner. So if you ever are experiencing issues or your app isn't doing what you think it's doing, the runner is a really good first choice to check just to see if something has gone wrong. So let's go back to here and fix it and test it out. And it looks like everything is re-rendered properly. Now let's see if our GET request actually works. So let's go to the network tab and we can just make a GET request to our profiles endpoint and it works. So we're getting an empty array and a 200 status code back. Success! Now, we might want to change the status code in the future, and Nest provides a way to easily do that. But for now, we're getting everything back that we need to, and we have a working GET route. So right now, we're returning an empty array. We'll be returning data once we get to the service file, where you'll usually hold most of your business logic in your app. Think of the controller layer as deciding what to do based on the request your API receives, what functions to call, and allowing your service layer to decide how to do it. If this doesn't make sense right now, that's okay. We're going to practice. For now, let's just focus on getting more comfortable with setting up routes and extracting data from the request object. Now, I think you're ready for your first challenge, so let me go ahead and reset this. I want you to recreate our GET route and just return an empty array. When you're done with the challenge, go ahead and submit it, and then we'll go over it together afterwards. Good luck. I hope that went well. So let's go ahead and restore our GET route. So we're going to call GET and then create our find all function, and that's just going to return an empty array. Let's go ahead and test it in the network tab. And success. So GET routes can often receive query parameters. So let's just go ahead and grab a query parameter to show you other things Nest can do. So we import that here, and then we're going to go ahead and pass in query, and let's go ahead and grab age. Age is going to be a number, and then just to make sure that we're reading this correctly, we'll go ahead and just pass in a single profile with age back to the client. Now let's test it out. Let's say age 25. And success. We're getting back a 200 with an array, a single profile, and an age of 25. So we are going to get a lot of practice in this course. So let me go ahead and reset this for you and prepare you for your new challenge. For this challenge, I want our GET route to expect to receive a query parameter of location and just return an array with a single object with the location passed in, just like we did before. All right, good luck. I hope that went well. So let's go ahead and import query. And then we're going to call query here. And we want to grab location. And then location is actually going to be a string. Now let's pass a profile with location back to the client and just make sure that we are properly receiving the query parameter and passing it through. Now, let's go ahead and test this out in our network tool to see if we are properly handling the location. Success! I hope your first challenges went well for you. If you struggled a little bit, that's okay. We are going to get a lot of practice. But that's it for this lesson. In our next lesson, we're going to go ahead and handle getting a single profile. I'll see you there. In this lesson, we're going to go ahead and create a route to handle getting a single profile. So we are going to need to grab the ID from the param. So let's go ahead and import that decorator. And then we are going to call get, and we're going to need to grab the ID. And let's go ahead and just call this function find1. And so we're going to have a param with an ID, and then our ID is just going to be a string. And just to make sure that we are properly, already made a mistake. This is going to be singular. Just to make sure that we are properly receiving the ID, we're going to pass it through and just return the ID in an object, just like we were returning a profile object. Now, let's go ahead and save it. And then we want to test it out using our network tool. And it does look like we are getting a 200 back. This looks promising, and we're seeing the ID. Perfect. So our route is successfully receiving the ID param and passing it back to the client. Now we want to build up muscle memory, so let's go ahead and give you your challenge. Let me go ahead and clear this out. And let me copy and paste in your challenge. So for your challenge, I simply want you to replicate this. You're just going to build out a route to be able to handle getting a single profile. You are going to look for an ID param, and then you're just going to go ahead and return that back to a client in an object. Don't forget to use the network tool to test out your code. All right, good luck. I hope that went well. So let's go ahead and go over the solution. So again, we're going to import param because we want to grab the ID. So our get is going to receive an ID, and then we'll call this find1. We're going to have a param with an ID, and again, that ID is going to be a string, and then we're just going to go ahead and return an object with that ID. As always, we want to test out our code, so let's open up the network tab. Let's go ahead and pass in a 2 this time. Success! Looks like we're getting a 2 back. And that's it for getting a single profile. In the next lesson, we are going to create a post route to be able to create a profile. I'll see you there. It's time to create a route to handle post requests for creating a profile. So let's go ahead and import post up here. Just start creating it down here. And so we're going to use the post decorator, and we're just going to call this function create. Now, before we pull data out of the body, we'll tell Nest what the data should look like by creating a data transfer object. Think of a DTO as a little shape contract for each request. It lists the properties we expect. For example, for our profile, we'll have a name, which is going to be a string, and a description, which is going to be a string. We write it as a class, not just an interface, because classes stick around at runtime. That lets Nest validation features, pipes, read the class metadata and reject bad payloads. So let's actually get started with that. We'll go ahead and create a DTO file. Typically, you will see a DTO file in a DTO folder. In that DTO folder, we'll go ahead and create a new file. We'll call this create profile DTO. So this is going to be a TypeScript file where we're just creating a class, and that class is going to have a name, which is a string, and a description, which is also a string. Now we need to hook it up in our controller. So let's go ahead and import that. Now we want to grab the body, so we're going to go ahead and grab the body decorator as well. So we'll call body here, and we could just call this create profile DTO. So we can just return the body here directly, but I'm going to be a little bit more explicit to just show that we're creating a new object, which is going to represent our profile, and then we'll break that down. So let's go ahead and return an object, and then we're going to have name. We're going to get that name from the body, and same with description. Now, at the time of this recording, the network tool is still being fleshed out in Scrimba, so we can use it for GET requests, but for post, put, and delete requests, we're going to need to use curl requests. Now, I actually created a bash script, which will make this very easy for you. So what we have here is just a script that sends a curl request, and that's essentially making a request that's going to hit our API. Now, if you're comfortable with curl, You'll notice that I have the -x post, which I don't think you need in newer versions. I think it can interpret that this is going to be a post request based off of the body that we're sending, but I just included it to be explicit. And in that post request, we're sending a body with a name and a description. Now you can change this as you see fit. Now let me show you how to test it out. So we want to go into our terminal, and all we're going to do is type bash and then the name of the file, post.sh. Now you can see that we're getting a 201 created, and everything looks good, right? 201 means created, but this can be very misleading. So one thing I notice is we actually should be receiving the response back, and that should be displayed in the terminal. So I noticed that the content length is 0. This indicates to me that something went wrong. Now, maybe I created this bug on purpose, or maybe it was an accident. You'll never know. But one of the first things that I want to check out is the runner. Ooh, it looks like we are not properly importing our DTO. So let's go ahead and fix that. So you'll notice that I actually put the file in the DTO folder. So let's actually scroll up, and we're going to add the folder. Let's go ahead and try this again. And now we are successfully getting the body back. We see a name and a description, so we're getting our profile. Now, usually when you create a resource, you'll usually see an ID as well. We haven't actually generated that yet, so we're not going to return it, but we'll hook up the logic to create a new profile soon. I think it's time for your challenge. So let me go ahead and reset this. Let me go ahead and copy and paste in your challenge. So all I want you to do is just replicate what we just did. You are going to create our route to be able to handle post requests. You are going to create a DTO file, and in that DTO file, you're going to have a class with a name and description, both of which are going to be a string. And then you're going to hook that up in your controller and then return the body. Don't forget to run the bash script at the end. Again, it's just bash space and then the file name. All right, go ahead and give this a try on your own, and then I'll see you on the other side. I hope that went well. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with creating a new folder. Call it DTO. We're going to create a new file in that folder, and we'll call it create profile DTO and export a class, create profile DTO. And the name is going to be a string, and the description is going to be a string as well. So we'll need to import this. So we know we're going to need post and body. And then let's import our DTO, create profile DTO, and we are going to import it from the correct place this time. And I hope that you did honestly create a bug. You got to experiment with a runner, because in reality, when you do get stumped, when your code doesn't work and you have to debug it, you often reinforce the concept even more. But who knows? Maybe we'll create another bug. So we have our post decorator, and then we're going to create our create function that'll take a body, and we're going to call this create profile DTO and map that to the DTO. All we're going to do is just return a new object. That name is going to get the name from the body and the description from the body as well. So let's test it out. And success. We are seeing a 201, and we are seeing name and description. And that's it for our post route. In the next lesson, we're going to tackle the put route for updating a profile. I'll see you there. So our put route is what we're going to build out to update a profile. You might have also heard of patch. Put updates the entire resource, while patch updates part of the resource. We're not going to go over patch because going over just put helps us learn what we need to here. I just wanted to mention this because when I was starting out, I often confused these two. Something else to keep in mind with put, it'll typically receive an ID parameter in the URL and the properties that it needs to update in the body. Now, you already know everything you need to in order to do this on your own, so let's go ahead and jump into the assignment. I actually created the DTO file for the update profile for you. You'll just need to create and export the class with the matching properties. You can refer to the create profile DTO as needed. In the response of your controller, just return an object with the ID, name, and description you receive from the request object. I also created the put shell script for you. Notice that there's just a random string here for the ID. For now, you don't actually have to change this to a working ID. We are just focused on reading the request object and returning the ID, name, and description back to the client. All right, I'll let you get to it. Good luck. I hope that went well. Let's go ahead and get started with building out the DTO class. We're going to export a class called updateProfileDTO, and then that'll have a name, which is a string, and a description, which is a string. Let's go back over to the controller. Now we're going to need to import put. It looks like we have param and body imported, so we're going to be able to get the ID in the body. So yep, we just need put. Let's come on down here. So put is going to take an ID, and then we'll just call this function update. Update is going to take a param, which is going to be the ID, and that ID is going to be a string. And then we're also going to want to grab the body, and we'll just call the body update profile DTO. And so we do need to import this. And then we're just going to return a new object, and it's going to have the ID. And you know what? We're just going to spread the body in. That should do it. Let's go ahead and test it out. So we are just going to write bash put.sh, and success. We are getting an object with the ID, name, and description. And that's it for the put route. In the next lesson, we'll go over delete. I'll see you there. Delete routes typically take an ID as a parameter and return a 204 status code on successful deletion. Up until now, Nest has conveniently taken care of sending the correct status code back to the client. Unfortunately, it won't be as simple with the delete request. If we just return in the delete controller, Nest will default to a 200. So in situations like this, where we want to control the status code that we're returning, Nest provides a convenient way to do that. I'll go ahead and set up the delete decorator for you so that I can show you how this works. So we're going to need to import 3 decorators: delete, HTTP code, and HTTP status. Now let's come on down here. So we are going to expect an ID parameter. And then for now, no matter what, we are going to use HTTP code to send a status. More specifically, we're going to go ahead and send an OK status, which is just a 200. And we can just call this function remove. So we're going to have an ID param, and then that is going to be a string. We're not going to use that just yet, but we're actually going to use it later in the course. Now, this should send back a 200. We don't necessarily need HTTP status to set the status to be 200, because without it, it'll default to 200. But I'm including it because we'll need to send a status code of 204. Let's go ahead and do a curl request to test this out. So you'll notice we do have a shell script here. This ID can be any ID for now. But let's go ahead and test this out, and we should get back a 200. Success! It's working. Now, for our purpose, this doesn't really accomplish our goal. Remember, we want to send back a status code of 204. That's your assignment. Looking up documentation is always a healthy thing to practice, so that's what I want you to do. Go ahead and look up what the HTTP 204 response is on MDN and see if you can then figure out what property on HTTP status represents a status code of 204. Let me go ahead and paste the challenge text in here for you. So change it to the proper status code and don't forget to test it. Good luck. I hope that went well. So what we're looking for is no content. Let's go ahead and test this out. And there we go. We're getting back a 204. Just a quick note, it's pretty common to serve back a 204 regardless if the profile being requested to be deleted is found or not. When we go over exceptions later in the course, I'll have you practice serving up a 404 when the profile isn't found with the delete route. That's just meant to give you more practice with handling exceptions. But that pretty much covers most of the decorators that you're going to use in the controller for your first Nest app. As your app grows, you'll likely use more built-in decorators, and for that, NestDocs will serve you well. We'll come back to the controller layer later, but for now, I think we've covered enough of the basics. Let's move on to the service layer. Here's a diagram of what a simple Nest app might look like. So we have our root application, and then we have different features. We have the auth feature, profile feature, and chat feature. Right now, we're building out the profile feature. And in our profile feature, we have a module file, a controller file, and a service file. So our profile module handles a lot of the imports for clean dependency injection. In our controller file, we set up all of our routes. Controllers are meant to handle HTTP requests, and they delegate more complex things to providers. We're primarily going to be going over one of the most common providers you'll be working with, services. The service layer is where you're going to put a lot of your business logic. So in our app, our controller handles the requests, and our service handles data storage and retrieval. The service layer can certainly do more than that, but that's what we're going to use it for with our profile feature. So let's go ahead and set up our first service. We'll actually use an SCLI to generate the service. All right, let's see what was created. So it looks like we have a new spec file and service file. We're not going to be doing anything with the spec file, which is just going to house a lot of our automated tests. But let's take a look at the service file. Notice the injectable decorator above the class. This enables our service class, when imported and used elsewhere, to create a new instance of it or reuse an already created one. So you don't have to create a new instance of it manually. Nest handles this for you. Now, the goal of this course is to just teach Nest concepts, not use an ORM or an object relational mapper for interacting with a database. So while normally you'd store this information in your database, we're going to store our data in our service class for now. Let me go ahead and copy and paste that in. And now let me go ahead and import something to be able to create random IDs for us. The random UUID method is just used to create a unique ID and is part of Node's built-in crypto module. It's not 100% guaranteed to be unique, but if you got it to generate two of the same IDs, you are one of the luckiest people in the world. It's pretty unique. Now, let's go ahead and create the function that's going to get and return all of our profiles. Let's call this find all. And then this is just going to return our profiles array. Now, let's go ahead and hook this up in our controller and finally return a list of profiles. So first, let's go ahead and import our service. Now, we're going to add it to the controller class through the constructor. So right now, we're just returning an empty array. Let's go ahead and actually return the list of our profiles. And as always, we want to test this out. So far, so good. We're getting a 200, and we see our profiles. We have Brianna, Jasper, and Leo. At last, we get to build out a working profiles feature. In the next lesson, let's handle getting just a single profile. All right, it's time to get your hands dirty. Using what you just learned in the last lesson, I want you to create the service method for getting a single profile and have the proper route in the controller return the result of that method. Remember, we're generating unique IDs every time we spin this app up, so you'll need to get the current list of profiles in order to get an ID that exists. You can use the network tab to be able to do that, and you just want to hit this route right here to get all of your profiles. Once you have that ID, you can use the network tool to then make a GET request with the ID as a parameter. So here's our slug to get all the profiles, grab an ID from this, and then we're going to get a single profile, and this is going to be used to test our newly created service method and make sure that we hooked it up in the controller successfully. Also, don't worry about handling the case where there isn't a matching profile with the ID given to us. We're going to go over how to handle that in upcoming lessons. For now, assume we're going to be given an ID that does exist, so just test with that. And for your convenience, I went ahead and just pasted the challenge steps. Just make sure that you complete them. You can check back if you forget. But you know everything that you need to in order to solve this challenge, so I'll let you get to it, and I'll see you on the other side. I hope that went well. Let's go ahead and jump into our service file. So we already have the method to be able to get all of the profiles, but we're going to have to think through how we're going to execute with JavaScript just a little bit more thoroughly. It's going to be a little bit different, but If you're comfortable with your fundamentals with JavaScript, this should have been no problem at all. Let's go ahead and call this find1. Find1 is going to take a ID, which is going to be a string. And then we want to just return a single profile. So let's go ahead and use the find method to do that. And we are going to get a profile. Let me just move this. And we want to match the profile ID of our current iteration with the ID that we are given here. And once that matches, we'll go ahead and just return that result from our find. And that should give us what we want. So let's go ahead and save this. And then go on over to our controller. Right now, we are just returning the ID that we get from the params. So we're going to have to change that. Now, we already imported our service. So we can go ahead and just type this profile service find1. And don't forget to pass in the ID. And that should give us what we want. So in order to test this, you could have gotten a unique ID before you started writing this. That's fine. But we mainly need it for when we're going to be working with trying to get a single profile. So I'm just going to click send to give us our new profiles. Let's go ahead and grab Jasper. So we're going to grab this ID. We're going to copy and paste it just like this. And then we are going to just enter that into the URL just like that. So we are looking for specific profile, and that should give us back the entire object, the entire profile. There we go. There's Jasper. That's all there is to it. Now you're going to get some more practice with building service methods and even just refreshing some of your JavaScript fundamentals if you're a little bit rusty. All right, I'll see you in the next lesson. All right, it's time to create a profile. And actually create a profile, not just return the body that we're sending. So we're going to hook up the functionality in our service layer, and I'll kind of just go over some of the steps. You can actually see them right here. They are pretty long. Don't let this intimidate you. The code is actually very minimal, and I'll show you that as well. But I just wanted to be very clear about this and give you what you need to be able to tackle this challenge. I'm very confident that you're going to be able to do it. So let's go over some of this. So essentially, you are going to be creating a function in the service file. We'll actually open that. Oh, we have it right here. So you're going to create a new function. You could just call it create or whatever you want. And it'll take the body of the post request as a parameter, which will be the body that we're getting in the controller. It needs to create a new profile and add it to the profiles array. Remember, each profile has an ID, a name, and a description. And also, it's good to remember that the backend is where you'll typically create IDs for new resources, not the client. You'll notice that in the original array, we're using random UUID to do that, so you can utilize that as well. We'll also want to return the new profile we've created to the controller and have that return it as a response in the client. So right now, we're just returning the body. We're actually going to need to call the new method that we create in the service file and then return the result of that. Now, once you've hooked that up successfully, don't forget that in the terminal, we can just call, let's see, where is it? We can just call the post sh file, and that will essentially hit our create route. And that's going to make a curl request to our post route. Now, you don't have to change anything, but if you want, you can change the name and description to play around with it. And you'll see your profile reflect whatever you choose to add for the name and description. I like to customize things like this. I think it kind of breaks me away from the monotonous flow of just going through lesson after lesson after lesson, and it gets me to critically think on my own. So change some things, break some things, experiment. I think that's always healthy. But I would keep the changes minimal at first until you actually solve the challenge, and then you could play around with it afterwards. So when you call the bash script, you will get a response with a 201, and it will have the same response body as when we tried to retrieve a single profile. So it's going to have the same structure. And so again, that structure is just going to be an object with the ID, name, and description. After you get the response from the post request, go ahead and just double check that it exists by making a GET request of the profile now that you have the ID. We use the network tab to do that. And if you want to see if your profile is added, you can actually just delete this and make a new request here to actually see it added to our array. Or you can just type in the ID as well to get a single profile. Because in our curl request, we're going to get a response that actually gives us the ID of our newly created profile. It's up to you how you want to double check. Now, you know everything that you need to in order to get started. Let's go ahead and go back to the controller file. And again, you have these steps and a couple things to test that it is working successfully. And don't worry, we're going to go over this challenge together, the solution, after you tackle the challenge on your own. So have fun with it. All right, I'll let you get to it, and I'll see you on the other side. I hope you had fun. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the service file. So we're going to need to create a new function. Before we do that, let's go ahead and import the type from our create profile DTO. Now let's scroll down and we are going to create our create function. So that I'm just going to call what we're receiving and be consistent with the create profile DTO. And this is why we imported the type. So now let's go ahead and just create an object that's going to represent our newly created profile. And that is going to have an ID. We're going to use random UUID to be able to create that. And then we are just going to spread the rest of the body, which is going to contain the name and the description, in our new object. And then we have our created profile, but now we need to add it to the array. So we are just going to push it, and then we'll go ahead and return the created profile because we want to go ahead and return that as a response to let the user know that this was the profile that was created. Now let's save it. And in our controller, we essentially want to, I'm actually going to just clear this text out because it's quite a bit and a bit noisy. And all we're going to do, notice how it's nice and clean because we separated our logic into the service. We're just going to return this profile service and we're going to call our new created function. And we are just going to pass in the body that we received. And that's it. Like I said, the code is pretty minimal, but as you kind of jump from different layers and you're separating different concerns in a larger application, it just takes some getting used to and hopping back and forth. And maybe this was fine for you, but if you did feel a little bit overwhelmed with all the steps, that's okay. We're going to continue to practice. You're going to get more comfortable with it. But, we could just be wrong. Maybe I broke it. So we still need to test this. So let's open up our tabs and we are going to go to the terminal and we're just going to type in bash post.sh. All right, success. Well, hopefully, let's just double check. I like to double check. Let's go to our network tab and then we are just going to make a new request to get all profiles. We see Brianna, Jasper, Leo. So it looks like this is not working. This is why we double check. Now, you guys might have spotted the bugs and you might have just been maybe yelling at your screen, Dodd, go back, change this. And good if you did. If not, that's okay. But this is why we double check. So we're going to go back to the service file. Here's our 2 bugs. And I'm going to tell you what kind of hinted towards me being able to figure this out. We have our runner. Don't forget to check this. So in the runner, it looks like we are just trying to get the DTO type from a file that doesn't exist because we made this plural when it should be singular. We're creating one profile. Now, let's look at our profile. And we have a new bug. ID is declared here. So let's go ahead and scroll down. Now, what we're doing is we are pushing an object essentially that just has a name and description. So we go to create profile. This is essentially the type that this array is expecting. And we are just sending the wrong thing. We're sending the body. We don't want to do that. We want to send the created profile. So let's go ahead and send the proper object. Let's click save. Cool. Seems like it's happy. Now, I don't think it successfully sent this and added the entry. Well, obviously it didn't. And if I would have noticed this and I would have taken a closer look, you notice that there is no ID, right? So this could have been a hint, but we have a lot of tools at our disposal to be able to debug this stuff. But we need to go ahead and call the bash script one more time. So we're going to type bash and then post sh. We do see the ID. That looks promising. All right. Fingers crossed. Let's click send. And looks like we might have a bonus profile. So we have Brianna, Jasper, Leo, and Kai. Success. Now, I actually think it's pretty cool that I created some bugs. Honestly, like I can still use refreshers. Everyone can still use refreshers. And it just gets further reinforced when you do hit that wall and then you overcome it. So if you are creating bugs and you are struggling, that is a good thing. That's where the learning is happening. So don't shy away from that. But also, it was just kind of cool to be able to go over how we might spot some of these bugs. And again, just a good reminder to use this runner. It'll catch a lot of stuff for you. Double check if things aren't going right. But that's it. We've created our logic to be able to handle actually creating a profile and returning it back to the client. In the next lesson, we will work on updating a profile that's already been created. I'll see you there. All right, so we don't want to stay with the same profile forever. We want the ability to update our dating profile. And that's what we're going to build out. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Here is your challenge. What you're going to do is you are going to add an update method in the service layer. It's going to take an ID and an object. In that object, you can expect a name and a description. Essentially, that object is just going to be what we get from the body when we get a put request. It should find the matching profile based on the ID. It should update that profile in the profiles array. It should return the updated profile. And then we're going to call that function in our put controller method and return the result. Now, we've already gotten some practice with hopping back and forth between the service layer and the controller layer, so I trimmed the instructions a bit. Hopefully, this is easier to read. Oh, and one more thing. You'll probably experience TypeScript errors when trying to update a profile when there's no match. So for now, when there isn't a match, just return an empty object. Soon we'll dive into exception filters, which will help us better respond to exceptions like when a resource doesn't exist. You can use the bash script already created for you here. If we open this up, you'll need to replace this ID with one that exists in a profile. So to get that, you'll need to get all of the current profiles with their unique IDs and use one of those. You already know how to do that. You've done that in the last lesson. Or if you want to get more experience with just making requests and getting the IDs from those requests, now that we've properly hooked up the post route, you can create a profile of your own and then just update it. All right, I'll let you get to it. Good luck. I hope that went well. All right, let's go ahead and start off with building our service method. So we are going to create a method. We'll just call it update. Again, that method is going to take an ID, which is going to be a string. And then we'll want to get the body. And we do need to import this. So I'll go ahead and just quickly import the type. Let's scroll on down and finish this. Perfect. So we'll need to find the matching profile, and we can use the find method to do that. So let's go ahead and just store this. And find is going to take, let's actually bring this down. We'll actually be explicit here. So existing profile. And we want to match the ID of our current iteration with the ID that we're passing through here. And just so that we don't hit any errors with trying to update the matching profile, which we're going to do, if it doesn't exist, we're going to have problems with that. So let's go ahead and escape early and just return that empty object if we don't find a matching profile. And so we're just going to return an empty object here. Now we want to update the name of the matching profile. And then we're going to go ahead and update the description as well. And then the last thing we need to do is just return that profile. Let's go back over to our controller. And so right now, we're just returning the ID we received from the params and the body. So we can go ahead and delete that. In fact, I'm going to delete all of this. And all we need to do is just return the new created method that we're going to call. We're going to return the result from that. But we need to pass in the ID and the body. That should do it. But as always, we need to test. So let's bring up the terminal. Let's go over here. So we're just going to type bash and then put .sh. Now, I just want to type this in because this is not going to work because of what I explained before. We're going to have to change the ID. So we're getting an empty object because nothing is matching. So the very first thing we actually need to do is we need to get all of the profiles and we need to get an active ID. So let's grab Jasper's and we're going to go ahead and go down to, let's actually just close that. We need to change this ID here. Let's go ahead and change it. Let's click save. Let's open up our terminal again. Clear this and one more time. And success. So we were able to update the profile. Again, we need a matching ID. Otherwise, we just get an empty object. And now let's go ahead and just double check. Let's go to the network tab. We're going to make another request and we can see that Jasper was replaced with Kai. Success. That's all there is to it. Now we are almost done with our main service methods. We have one more method to create, and that's our method to handle removing a profile. We'll go ahead and tackle that in the next lesson. I'll see you there. All right, let's go ahead and create our last service method that's going to match up with the routes that we created. So we are going to remove a profile now. So I'm going to go ahead and give you your assignment. You're going to create a method in the service file to handle the delete request. It should take an ID and delete the profile that matches that ID. If there's no match, don't do anything with the profiles array. You just don't delete anything. Regardless of whether or not it finds a match, don't worry about returning anything in the service method. In a later lesson, we'll handle the case where there's no match. So you could just essentially return undefined or not return anything at all because undefined is going to be default. Our controller is already properly responding with a 204 and an empty body. So you just need to call the service method in the controller. That's it. Don't forget to test your new route. We have a shell script here. You're going to need to open this up and change this ID with an active ID. You already know how to get active profiles, so you'll need to do that and then run the shell script in the terminal. All right, I'll let you get to it. Good luck. I hope that went well. Let's go ahead and build this out. So let's go ahead and just create a remove function here. We're going to receive an ID. That ID is going to be a string. Be a little bit explicit with TypeScript. And then we are going to need to get the matching profile index. And what I'd like to use is Splice to be able to do this. So at the index, we're just going to use find index. And we want to match the profile ID of the current iteration with the ID that we're passing through. And then let's go ahead and just splice the array if we find a matching index. So if we don't find a matching index, we're going to get -1. But anything above -1, we're going to assume that we do find a match. And then we'll just use splice to edit our array in place. So that should be it for the service method. Let's go ahead and go on over to the controller. And then we're going to remove this text. And all we're going to do, again, really simple, call our newly created method, and we need to pass in the ID. So it should work, but as always, we want to double check. We want to test. So let's go ahead and just get some active IDs. We're going to delete Leo. Let's copy and paste this. We need to go into our shell script, and then we could just paste that there. And then we're going to just go to our terminal. Let's go ahead and try it out. And I think I said shell script. Bash script is just a type of shell script, so you can use those interchangeably in this example. So we're going to just type bash, and delete sh. So we are getting a 204 success. Remember, we are serving up a 204 always, so that can be a little bit misleading. So we're going to go ahead and just make sure that the method was called and it did work. Let's go back over to our network tab and do another scan. Looks like we only have Brianna and Jasper, so that deletion was successful. And that's it. We pretty much created all the service methods to match up with the logic that we need to happen whenever we get a certain type of request in our controller. So this might even be a good chance to take a break if you've been coding for a long time. Come back refreshed, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Up until this point, we've mainly just been building for the happy path. In real apps with the real users, this is just unrealistic. We're going to also have to handle edge cases and errors that pop up. Nest actually comes with a built-in exception layer which aims to handle all unhandled exceptions or errors across the application. If an exception is unrecognized, Nest aims to at least respond with a 500. Often, though, we'll want to control how we respond to the client. So let's jump into it. First of all, we're going to need HTTP status and HTTP exception. Let's go on over to our get with the parameter of ID. So if we're trying to get a single profile, we want a profile that matches that ID. But what if the ID doesn't match? We want to be able to handle that case. Well, for now, let's actually comment this out. And let's just throw an HTTP exception and let the user know that we didn't find the resource. So we're not even going to do anything with the ID. We're just going to test this new exception thing out. So let's go ahead and throw new HTTP exception. And so the message we're going to deliver is a not found, but an important thing that all the clients are going to especially want is the status code. And so again, Nest provides us with a lot of the common status codes, and we're going to go ahead and just serve up a 404. So in order to test this, we're going to go ahead and try to get a single profile and see if this works. If it does, we're going to get a 404 in response. So let's test this out. And let's just do some random ID that probably doesn't exist. Not found. So we see a status code of 404. Let me actually scroll. We're seeing the message not found, and we're seeing the status code of 404. So it's working. Nest actually provides a set of standard exceptions that are inherited from the base HTTP exception, and often we'll throw that in the controller. So we'll just kind of clean this up a little bit. Let's go ahead and get rid of HTTP exception, and we'll come back down. So this isn't going to work anymore. But what we are going to use is not found exception. So that's essentially going to do the same thing. All I really care about is serving up that status code. And this will go ahead and deliver that. So let's go ahead and save with that. And it'll respond to our client request, no matter what ID we give it, not found. And it has its own default message. Notice we did not have to put that in. So this is a little bit cleaner. Now, let me show you a really cool thing about Nest. Let's go over to let's actually comment this out. And then we're going to go over to our service file. And let's look at the find one. Let's go ahead and just throw an exception before the return. So no matter what, whenever we call this function, we're always going to be throwing an exception. But we do need to import the not found exception from Nest Common. Let's save that. And then we're just going to call that here. So let's go ahead and save this. And then we're going to go back to our controller. And we are going to just call profile service and return it. In fact, we don't even need to return it. I'm going to show you this. So let's go ahead and save this. And we'll make the same request. And we got a 404 again. Now, we're not even returning anything, right? So the cool part is we just call this function, and any errors are thrown here. They're going to bubble up to the controller, and Nest just provides that convenience for you, right? So this is a pretty convenient because, as you'll see in a second, this will be really useful for this method. right? What happens when we don't find a profile? So again, we go back to the controller. We don't even need to return this. We can. It doesn't matter if we return it or not, because once we throw this exception, this takes over, and this is what's served back to the client. And what does the client see? Status code of 404, not found. So let's actually be practical about this. We don't always want to throw this. What we probably want to do is check if there's a matching profile. If there is a matching profile, we want to go ahead and return this. If not, then we want to go ahead and return that 404 or throw an exception and allow that to be caught and served up to the client. So let's go ahead and delete this. And we are going to store this in a variable. Let's call it matching profile. If there is no matching profile, we want to go ahead and throw that new not found exception. And we can actually provide a custom error message. I just wanted to show you this. Let's make it a practical profile with ID. ID not found. And then if this condition is never met, we want to go ahead and just return the matching profile. Let's go back over to our controller. So we are calling this. We can actually get rid of this just to clean it up. So we are calling this method. And if we find an ID, it should return a profile that actually matches. And if not, we should get that 404. So let's test it out. All right, so we do get the error message by default, but if we want a custom message to also send to the client, we have profile with ID and then the ID that we pass through, not found with a 404. So obviously this ID doesn't exist. Let's go ahead and just take a look at all profiles. Let's grab Brianna's. And then we're going to go ahead and make a request to Brianna. And so this is just demonstrating our conditional logic is working. If we do match a profile, then we serve up the profile that's matching. If not, we get that 404 error. I think this bubbling up behavior is really convenient for beginners because in this method, we already know that if we don't have a matching profile, let's just go ahead and handle that exception here, throw it, and we're done. No matter what, we're calling the function in our controller and letting the method in our service file just handle everything because it has some of the context of what it needs to in order to either return a matching profile or not. Feel free to play around with this as you like, but in the next lesson, I'm actually going to give you several challenges to be able to practice this. So I hope that made sense. If it didn't, you'll get practice in the next lesson. I'll see you there. In this lesson, I'm going to go ahead and give you a couple challenges. You are going to update the update and delete methods to be able to throw the proper exception when a matching profile is not found. You'll have to change each method a little bit differently to make that work. But remember, if there is a matching profile, we still want to return that matching profile, so make sure that works. All right, I'll let you get to it. Good luck. I hope that went well. Let's go ahead and tackle the update method. So we already have the conditional to check if there isn't a matching profile. So we just need to change line 61. And we are going to throw our not found exception here. And then let's go ahead and provide that custom message as well. And we'll include the ID. And that should be it. Let's go on over to our remove method. So we are only editing the array in place if there is a matching index. So we're going to change this slightly. Let's bring this down. Give this a little bit of space. And then our conditional is something we're going to have to change as well. So I'd like to opt out of the method and throw that exception early if there's no matching profile index. So let's go ahead and throw our not found exception here. And again, let's provide the custom error message. I'm going to cheat, copy and paste this. All right. So that should do it. Now, we are throwing the exception if there's no matching profile index, and we are editing the array in place if there is a matching profile. Now, this will work because we have our decorator to automatically serve up a no content, which is going to be a 204 status code. But if we do throw that exception, this is what's going to take priority. But as always, we want to test this. So let's go ahead and open this up. And then we're going to go ahead and get all of our profiles. So here's how I'm going to test this. There are different ways that you could have gone about it. I'm going to go ahead and edit Brianna and then try to delete her. So let's go ahead and change these IDs. Oops. And delete as well. Now let's test this out in the terminal. So with Brianna, let's go ahead and see if we can update her profile. So we're just going to call our shell script. And we did get a result back. Hopefully this is working. I like to just do a quick sanity check. Let's go ahead and click send. So we have the same ID with Kai and a new description. So that was successful. Now let's see if we can delete Kai. And we got a 204. So let's just make sure that Kai was actually deleted, and it looks like he was. Perfect. So now we know that that profile no longer exists. So it still works when we have a matching profile. Let's see if it works when we don't have a matching profile. Let's go ahead and go back over to the terminal. Let's clear this. And then we're going to try to edit. And it looks like we are properly getting a 404. And let's try the delete. And we are getting a 404 with the delete as well. Success. So I purposefully showed you a non-conventional way to do this so you could see the power of Nest bubbling up those errors to the controller. Honestly, for basic apps, I think it's fine to throw HTTP specific exceptions inside the service and let them bubble up. But as an application grows, it's cleaner to let the controller decide which HTTP exception to return. This keeps services focused on business logic and makes them reusable in non-HTTP contexts where an HTTP exception just wouldn't make sense. In the next lesson, I'm going to show you a more conventional way to do this. Now, again, if you're just starting out for basic apps, I think it's completely fine to handle HTTP exceptions in the service layer, but let me go ahead and show you a little bit more of a conventional way to do this. Now, let's shift the responsibility of handling HTTP exceptions to the controller. So we'll go ahead and just do this for getting a single profile. So right now we're throwing the exception here. What I'm actually going to do is just throw an error. Let's go ahead and save that. Let's go on over to our controller. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this in a try catch block. And then we are going to just catch the error. And in here, we're just going to throw the not found exception. And we're going to get the error message and pass that through. So let's go ahead and test this out. Open up the network tab. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to pass a random ID that is not going to exist. And we're getting a not found. Now on your screen, you might see a TypeScript error. I'm not worried about fixing this because we're going to move on and do something a little bit more specific. You might be thinking that this only handles a very specific case and that it's not handling other types of common errors that we would handle, and you'd be right. In Nest, your service layer often handles requests to the database, and your ORM or whatever library you use to structure your queries often will have built-in error objects that you can throw or return in your service function and let your controller figure out a matching HTTP exception. In actual applications, we would probably want to catch the error in the controller like so. So maybe something like if error is instance of database exception, then we're going to go ahead and throw new not found exception here. Now, this isn't going to work because we haven't hooked up any database or imported any types for that, but I just wanted to show you something that you might commonly see in a controller. And for many apps, the base exception filter can handle a lot of cases for you, but if you ever want more control, you may want to build your own exception filter. And for that, the Nest docs are a great resource for whenever you want to dig a bit deeper. But once more, I just want to stress, I'm kind of just showing you a little bit more of a conventional way to start handling some of the exceptions. Again, in your basic app, I think it's completely fine to throw an HTTP exception in the service layer, and I honestly would just start with that. Keep things simple for you just so you can get an application and API up and running, because Nest has a lot of depth to it, and I want you to be very careful about how deep you dive just to get a basic application up. But that's pretty much all I want to go over with exceptions. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to go over pipes and talk about transformation and validation. I'll see you there. Pipes and Nest have two typical use cases: transformation and validation. Transformation allows us to transform input data to the desired form, such as from a string to an integer. Validation ensures the input data meets certain rules before it proceeds further in the request lifecycle. Now, we're going to go over both, but this lesson is dedicated to transformation. Since our IDs are UUIDs, why not transform those? Let's use the parse UUID pipe to try and transform our ID, which we get as a string, into a UUID. So let's start with our imports. We are going to need parse UUID pipe. And then let's actually go ahead and import, we'll make this a type. So we're going to import the UUID type from crypto. If we move on down to our get a single profile route, we have our ID param, but it remains a string. So let's go ahead and transform it into a proper UUID. And then for TypeScript, we already imported the type. Now, as always, let's test this out. So we're going to need the network tool. We first need a list of active IDs to test this out. So let's go ahead and grab those. And if we take a look at the response, we can go ahead and grab Brianna's. And let's just make sure this is still working. Perfect. We see Brianna's profile. Now, UUIDs have a very specific format you got to follow. So let's actually just try deleting the last character. And what do you know? We see validation failed. So it attempted to transform it, but it detected a bad UUID format, so it was unable to do so, and we got a validation error. This is exactly what we want, because now our route can always expect a proper UUID to work with. All right, it's time for your challenge. Let me go ahead and copy and paste in the challenge text for you. So if you remember, we have an ID param for both the put and delete routes. I want you to go ahead and use the parse UUID pipe on those as well and transform that ID. And as always, don't forget to test your code. Remember, you have the put and delete shell scripts to do so. All right, good luck. I hope that went well. Let's go ahead and implement it with the put first. So we have the ID param. We want to go ahead and parse this. And then we also want to change this for TypeScript. And I'm actually going to go ahead and just copy and paste the same thing for our delete route. As always, we want to test this out. Let's grab an active profile. So first, we'll try to change the profile Brianna Watts, and then we're going to try to delete it. Let's head on over to our put, and then we're going to replace this ID, and we're first going to try to change it. All right, let's just double check that it actually did change. And we see Kai, perfect. Now, let's go ahead and test it out with an improper UUID. It looks like our pipe is working and failed to transform it because we did not have a proper UUID for our string. Let's just make sure Kai is still there. All right, now let's try to delete Kai. But before we do, let's give it an improper UUID. And it looks like our pipe is working. Let's give it a proper one. And I went ahead and just pasted Kai's in just to make sure that we can actually delete this successfully. All right, so we are getting a 204. Let's test it out. Profile not found. Success! That's all you need for a first look at built-in pipes. You've seen how they can transform raw strings into UUIDs, and there are plenty of others you can try out. Now that our route parameters are guaranteed to be the right type, we need to be sure each request body also contains valid values. In the next lesson, we'll use Nest validation pipe, add class validator decorators to our DTOs, and watch Nest reject bad payloads before they ever even reach our controller. While Nest provides some simple, common out-of-the-box pipes for us to use, we may want to get more granular with what we expect from the data. For example, maybe we want each name to have a minimum amount of characters. So let's go ahead and add that. Before we start though, we'll need to install 2 libraries that'll give us a bunch of extra decorators that we can use to validate incoming data. That's class validator and class transformer. While we'll only be importing from class validator in our simple validation examples, it's common and even recommended in the Nest docs to install both. Class transformer lets validation pipe convert plain JavaScript objects into instances of classes so decorators can read them. They both work really well together, especially as your transformations and validations get more complex. Now that these are installed, we can add a few useful decorators to the create profile DTO class. Let's go ahead and head on there. So first, let's go ahead and import them. So let's just check for a string, and then we're going to give a specific length that the name needs to have. So it's really simple to add these decorators. So length is going to take a minimum amount of characters and a maximum. So I think 3 is good for the minimum, and then we'll say 100 for the maximum. That should do it. And then we just want to make sure that the description is a string as well. Now this won't quite work yet. We first need to bind the validation pipe. Let's bind the pipe instance to the route handler body so that our pipe is called to validate the body. So we'll do that in our controller. So let's go ahead and bind it like so. And then we are going to need to import it. Now, let's go ahead and test it out. So we're actually going to go to our post shell script, and then let's try to create Kai and just make it Ka and see if we get rejected. And we are getting a bad request, and the message name must be longer than or equal to 3 characters. Now let's go ahead and add the I back and try it again. And success. Now it's time for your challenge. Let me go ahead and copy and paste in the challenge text. So you're going to add the validation pipe for the body in our put route. Using class validator, add a couple of decorators to our update profile DTO to create more granular restrictions for the values. And feel free to look up class validator and just explore what decorators it provides. Maybe try something different than the length decorator that we used. All right, I'll let you get to it. Good luck. I hope that went well. So let's go ahead and get started in our update profile DTO. Let's import our decorators. And you know what? Let's go with min length. So name is going to be is string, and length or min length. We'll set that to, let's just stick with 3. And then our description is going to be a string. Let's head on over to our controller. And then again, in the body, we're going to create a new validation pipe, and let's test it out. So it looks like we got validation failed. Let's see what happened. So if we look back at our terminal, hopefully you remember what to do with this. So we first need to make sure that we are providing a proper UUID. So let's go ahead and grab one. We'll just copy and paste this. Now I expect this to be successful. And it was. Now let's break it. Name must be longer than or equal to 3 characters. It's working. Also, notice how we bound each validation pipe to each body. While this gives us more granular control over which route we want to apply it to, it's more common to protect all of your endpoints by binding it at the application level. Let me go ahead and show you how to do that. So first, we're going to get rid of the two additions here. And then we're going to go into our bootstrap file, which should be main. And then we're going to set up a global pipe. And that is going to be our validation pipe. So we're going to need to import that. It's going back over to our controller. So we don't have it here or here. Let's test it out. If we look at our put shell script, this should break. Name must be longer than or equal to 3 characters. Perfect, it's working. By the way, when I say break, I just mean the payload's rejected. But you get the gist. Now, given that Nest is full of classes, Class Validator is a fantastic library to give you a ton of extra convenient validations for your data. Guards in Nest have one purpose: to determine whether a given request will be handled by the route handler or not. For example, think authorization. Maybe we just want admins to be the only one who can delete profiles, or we want users to only be able to update their own profile. We can actually use the CLI to get us started. So let's go ahead and open up the terminal, and then we're going to go ahead and generate a new guard for profiles. All right, let's take a look. So in profiles, we do see that there is a new guard. Remember, a guard's single responsibility is to determine whether or not a given request will be handled or not. So the main thing it needs to do is return a true or false based on the logic you set up. Let's go ahead and bind this to a route to get it working. So we can actually get rid of validation pipe, and we're going to import use guards from Nest Common. And then let's go ahead and import our guard, and we need to bind it. Let's go ahead and bind it to the delete route. So we take a look at our guard. It looks like we are returning true, so it should let the request pass through. And then if we take a look at delete, what we probably should get is a validation error because this is not a proper UUID. So let's test it out. All right, so we got our validation error. Now let's see what happens when we return false. And we get a 403, forbidden. Perfect, that's exactly what we want. At a fundamental level, that's how a guard works. It either returns true or false, accepting or rejecting the request. Now let's take a closer look at this custom guard. Now, I don't expect you to remember all this, I just want to show you this. If you use something like Passport.js, it provides the decorators to be able to just import the proper guard in your controller and bind it without you having to go into creating some custom guard for yourself, unless you want to. But I just want to show you this to give you a little bit more context. So every guard must implement a can activate function. We can get information from the request through context, and we need to decide if we should allow this request to pass to our controller method or not. So for example, let's go ahead and grab the request. And now let's pretend that we have an authenticate function. So I'm not going to import it, I'm not going to create it, but let's just pretend we do. And then in that authenticate function, we want to pass a request and let our authenticate function deal with the authentication logic. And we applied a guard to a specific controller method, but as you may suspect, just like validation pipe, guards can be applied to a broader scope, such as the controller class, or globally as well. Guards are very commonly used for authorization. I wanted to avoid diving deep into authorization in this course and just focus on the fundamentals of Nest. But the concept of guards is pretty simple, and Nest has great documentation for implementing them. Most likely, though, you're probably just going to use the Passport integration if you want to implement authorization in your app. And that's it for our lesson on an intro to guards. I'll see you in the next lesson. Congratulations on completing this course. You just built a REST API with Nest building blocks, modules, controllers, services, and DTOs. plus pipes for transformation and validation, guards for authorization, and exception filters for graceful error handling. That's miles beyond the typical Hello Express app. Give yourself a pat on the back. You've shown that you're curious and are taking your growth into becoming a better backend developer seriously. So, I bet you're asking what's next. If you want to continue learning and diving deeper into Nest, consider connecting a database. Try the Type ORM or Prisma guides in the docs to persist profiles instead of using an in-memory array. I actually switched from Prisma to Type ORM recently, and I'm loving it. You can also set up authentication and authorization. Follow the official passport recipe. Passport's a really common thing to use with NestJS, and set up some role-based guards with it. And you can also use encryption and hashing utilities for passwords. And if you want to write some automated tests for what we built even so far, go for it. Nest ships ready-to-use unit and end-to-end test scaffolding. Fire up Jest and protect your controllers and services. Or if you have more experience with front-end and you finally want to build out your own API documentation that you've been utilizing when working with other backend teams, add Swagger or Open API to your project and generate live API docs for your project. Nest makes this really easy. In my own projects, I love using Nest CLI plugin that auto-generates the Open API docs from Decorators. Or deploy your application. Read about Nest's recommended deployment practices to get your website live so that you can show others what you built. Now, in my personal opinion, if you're pretty fresh with the backend, that is going to be a pretty big hurdle. If you want an easier hosting solution, I highly recommend third-party guides for something like hosting your Nest app on Render, Railway, or Heroku. It really simplifies the DevOps part of hosting your web app. But if you're going to start anywhere, start with the Nest docs. If you truly want to get better with Nest and you want to build great things with it, you're going to be spending a lot of your time there. Now, you can continue learning Nest and continue building on the project we built together, but maybe start with building out your own basic API first. Try to replicate what we just did, but with your idea. Or even take one of your Express apps and convert that over to Nest. Just whatever you do, don't get trapped in tutorial hell. If you want this stuff to stick, if you want to grow as a software engineer, you have to build. And remember, Nest is built for large, maintainable TypeScript apps. So if it still feels a little overwhelming, that's normal. Give yourself weeks or even months of building with Nest, and those decorators will feel like second nature. And most importantly, thanks for coding along with me. Software engineering is a never-ending journey, and that's one thing I love about it. There's always room to grow and more challenges to tackle. If you'd like to follow along on my journey, and where I also share a ton of advice for junior developers, check out my YouTube channel. And you're also welcome to follow me on X or LinkedIn. But that's it for this course. Go build something awesome, and happy coding.